Shalom, everyone, to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. This will be our concluding class on the Ba'al Shem Tov series, and it will also be the concluding class for 2 months. You can mark your calendar. Tuesday, June 10th will be our next class. Tuesday, June 10th. But you will be hearing a lot from me in the next 2 months, just not this live class. You'll be getting every week the Haftorah for the week. You'll be getting every week numerical gems. You'll be getting every week our mass email on Wednesdays. And you will also get messages from me during these next 2 months. Not 100% clear the form of these messages. Many of them will just be short, but you will hear from me, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we will meet again on June 10th. I have a number of ideas for a new series, but it's still percolating. And I have to say, it's with a little sadness that after almost 8 months or even more, we are going to conclude our learning about the life and teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. But on the other hand, I'm so happy that we had the chance to do this. And even for myself, to be able to delve into his life, his teachings, what a zchut, what a merit. So tonight we are going to finish the last years of the life of the Ba'al Shem Tov, and then the last 7 weeks of his life, and then a concluding summary of the influence of the Ba'al Shem Tov to this day. We discussed many times how the Ba'al Shem Tov was born only approximately 50 years after the trauma of the false Messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi. And in those 50 years, there were actually pockets of followers of Shabbatai Tzvi who, let's say, went underground, because at that point it was very unpopular or even dangerous to associate openly with Shabbatai Tzvi, but his influence was still somewhat there. And in fact, we said that one of the many reasons that those who opposed the new Hasidic movement found, even though they were not justified, was they were afraid that the Ba'al Shem Tov was going to be another Shabbatai Tzvi. So there are many stories that the Ba'al Shem Tov, he very much wanted to kind of fix the soul of Shabbatai Tzvi. Shabbatai Tzvi had passed away, but again, because of his influence, that he wanted to try to fix his soul in the other world. We have a teaching in the Zohar that it's usually told about a tzaddik, that when a tzaddik leaves this world, his influence or her influence actually increases, because now they are not encumbered by a physical body, and in a certain way, they are in a more spiritual situation to influence this world. But the Ba'al Shem Tov wanted to fix the soul of Shabbatai Tzvi. There are a number of stories that he really battled with him. But the interesting thing is that he wanted to get him to do tshuva. In other words, no Jew was too far away for the Ba'al Shem Tov to want to try to help. And we're going to see how that plays itself out in a few minutes. But as the tradition is handed down, his soul, when he had these elevations of soul, and he was in the presence of those who had passed on, he, in a certain way, tried to get Shabbatai Tzvi to do tshuva with the hope that that would then influence whoever was left of his followers to do the same. But he failed. He felt that he failed, that he tried, but he couldn't get Shabbatai Tzvi to do tshuva. After Shabbatai Tzvi, there was another figure who in a certain way was even more dangerous. And his name was Yaakov Frank. Yaakov Frank was born in Europe. For quite a while, he lived in Turkey. And Turkey was really the headquarters of the remaining followers of Shabbatai Tzvi. So he became influenced by the leftovers of Shabbatai Tzvi. And he returned from Turkey in 1756, which is only 4 years before the Ba'al Shem Tov passed away. And he, like Shabbatai Tzvi, he was very charismatic. He had a lot of, call it soul powers, but they were definitely in the negative. And in a certain way, he went way beyond Shabbatai Tzvi. There were all kinds of rumors about what Shabbatai Tzvi was doing and what he was teaching his followers. But Yaakov Frank went way beyond that. And we have to remember that at a certain point, Shabbatai Tzvi was jailed by the Sultan of Turkey because he was getting so popular and so powerful. And at a certain point, the Sultan gave him a choice: convert to Islam or die. And to the shock of the Jewish world, he converted. And all of his followers converted to Islam. And they thought that this was some kind of way that he was fighting against the other side, and that this was only a temporary thing, whatever, but he converted to Islam, and he died in exile. Yaakov Frank, he comes back to Europe, and he starts to gather followers. And one of the things he learned from Shabbatai Tzvi, but he took it to the extreme. In the Amidah, we praise God that he is Matir Asurim. He frees those that are imprisoned, who are captive. Matir Asurim. In modern Hebrew, as someone in jail is in the Beit Asurim, in jail. And God can free us. Now, this is also on a personal level, not necessarily a physical jail, but like we talk about Mitzrayim, coming from the root Meitzar, a narrow place. Anyways, Yaakov Frank took this to the extreme, and he was teaching his students that the way to bring Mashiach, the way to holiness, was literally to break the halacha, to break Jewish law and do forbidden things, supposedly with good intentions. And it led to mass orgies, quite literally. That was part of all the followers. They got into sexual orgies. And of course, the rabbis were extremely concerned, and a lot of the followers were young. And at a certain point, Yaakov Frank started teaching against Judaism altogether, and he befriended different Christian bishops and monks, and he began telling them terrible things about Judaism, especially the Talmud, especially the Gemara. And due to his influence, well, first of all, the Christians were quite happy about this, and they organized a debate between Yaakov Frank and rabbis. And of course, it was a setup because the Christians see that Yaakov Frank is in a certain way leaning towards them. And they hope to convert all of these Jews. And so the debate was like a setup, and Yaakov Frank was declared the winner. And the penalty was the church was now going to burn every Talmud they could get their hands on. Now, we know that this was not the first time. The debate was between Yaakov Frank and his followers and kosher rabbis, but it was overseen by the church. Now, we know that going back to the Ramban, Nachmanides, that Jews were forced into these debates, and usually they were just excuses to pass more decrees against the Jews. But here, Yaakov Frank is considered the winner, and now they are going to burn all of these Talmuds. We know that there was a very, very horrific burning of the Talmuds in Paris in the 1200s. And that's when they were still handwritten. There was no printing press. Here, there's already a printing press, but still. So in 1757, they burned over 1,000 sets of Talmud. Meaning, this was like horrific. And I mentioned last week that even though the Ba'al Shem Tov is the master of joy, these kind of horrific decrees against the Jews had a tremendous effect on him. It took a lot of strength for him because he was trying spiritually to defend the Jews and to cancel these decrees. But here they burned all of these Talmuds, and they were in the process of burning more. And so the next major one was going to be in Kamenetz, and there was a bishop, Bishop Dembowski. The Ba'al Shem Tov traveled to Kamenetz. It was a very, very big Jewish community there, many, many rabbis. And the Ba'al Shem Tov sent a warning to the bishop that if he continued to burn the Talmuds, he would die a horrific death. And the bishop just laughed at this message, and they went forward to burn more Talmuds. In the midst of the burning, this bishop went into convulsions in front of everyone. He went into convulsions, and he died on the spot. Died on the spot. That sent fear through the Christian community because they were aware of this warning, and it stopped the burnings, at least for then. But this took a tremendous amount of energy from the Ba'al Shem Tov. Then the church called for another debate. And this time, the Ba'al Shem Tov was one of the rabbis in the debate. And partly because of what had happened, for a change, the Jews were considered the winners. I mean, the Frankists were Jews, but the Ba'al Shem Tov's team was considered the winner. And one version is that as a penalty for the Frankists for bringing all of these rumors against the Jews, they cut off half of the men, obviously, half of their beards and one of their side locks, kind of to show, well, are you Christian or are you Jewish? Like, what are you? And what happened after that is Yaakov Frank followed Shabbatai Tzvi, and they, in mass, he and all of his followers converted to Roman Catholicism. And again, this was like a tremendous, traumatic, scandalous episode in Jewish history. And they all became supposedly Roman Catholics, but obviously the ramifications rippled through the Jewish community. Now, Yaakov Frank wasn't anywhere near as popular as Shabbatai Tzvi was at his height. At his height, the majority of Jews in the world believed he was the Mashiach. Many people don't know the whole story here, but it wasn't just like a little false Messiah here. He had the majority, including the majority of rabbis, felt that he was the Mashiach and the Messianic era was about to unfold. And then it collapsed. What happened after that is, this is just who the Ba'al Shem Tov was. He had compassion on these people. They were so, what's called off the derech. They were so just lost their connection to Judaism. He wanted to bring them back. He didn't give up on them. Now, obviously, he on one hand, he fought against them tooth and nail, to the detriment of his own health and energy. On the other hand, he didn't want to admit that any Jew was too far away that he couldn't be influenced to come back. But the religious establishment just didn't understand this. How could he be, trying to get them to do tshuva? Like, they're lost, they're gone, they're done with. Anyways, what happened shortly afterwards is because, and we dealt with this last week, a whole list of reasons why the Jewish religious establishment was afraid of the new Hasidic movement. And so around 1758, there was the first ban against the Hasidic movement. In other words, they were excommunicated. Now, this is obviously a very extreme measure. And it's I'm just throwing out a number, for about 100 years, it split the Jewish world. It took about 100 years until the ramifications of this ban, and it started in one city, in Shklov, in the Ukraine, and it was later picked up by other communities, and the ban was expanded, and the entire Hasidic movement was excommunicated. Now, you can imagine how traumatic it was to the Ba'al Shem Tov and to the new movement. The Ba'al Shem Tov made it very clear that no one was to respond in a, certainly not a violent way, or through hatred or anything like that. They were, in a sense, just go ahead with your business, and we are going to continue to spread the Hasidic movement, but we're not going to respond. And at a certain point, I have to say, a lot of violence was used against the Hasidic movement. It's a sad, sad episode. But the Ba'al Shem told everyone, do not respond. And the Alter Rebbe also, the Alter Rebbe, about 40 years later, was even before that, was sent to the Vilna Gaon to try to reverse the ban, and the Vilna Gaon would not meet with them. He refused to even meet with them. But the Alter Rebbe took the Ba'al Shem Tov's advice and said, we will not respond violently. We have to try to keep this in measure, but it doesn't mean that we have to stop being Hasidim. So the Ba'al Shem Tov, both of these, in the whole thing with Yaakov Frank and with the ban, it took a tremendous toll upon him. And he was very aware that his spiritual powers were waning. He had invested so much of his energy that he felt that he had peaked, and he even let his students know that things are not the same with me. Things are not the same with me. Now we're getting towards 1760. And now we are going to deal with the last 7 weeks of his life. There's some very interesting things that we can learn here. It's interesting because a lot of this is given over. Also, when the Ba'al Shem Tov passed away, a lot of stories of what happened the last weeks or months were handed down in the Breslov community. The most famous case, really, of having a record of the last days of a tzaddik was Shimon Bar Yochai, and it's written up in the Zohar in what's called the Idra Zuta, the small gathering place. And especially the last day of his life, because he gave over certain teachings that are recorded in the Zohar. Here, we're going to deal with the last 7 weeks. And it began on Pesach. On Pesach, the Ba'al Shem Tov was becoming aware that his days were numbered. But he didn't say anything explicit to anyone. And so one of his top students was Pinchas of Koretz. And Pinchas of Koretz was with him during Pesach. And it was the custom of Rabbi Pinchas is to go to the mikveh every day. The last day of before the last day of Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach, meaning on the 6th day, as he was preparing for it, he wasn't feeling well, and he decided it might be dangerous for me to go to the mikveh. You have to remember, in those days, the mikvahs were not heated. They were cold, freezing in many cases. So he didn't go to the mikveh. But during the day, he began, he had, we'll call it a premonition that the Ba'al Shem Tov was going to pass away soon. And he said to himself, I should have gone to the mikveh, because if I would be able to pray for the Ba'al Shem Tov in the mikveh, maybe I could help change the decree. But he didn't say anything. Right after Pesach, the Ba'al Shem Tov said to him, did you go to the mikveh before the seventh day of Pesach? And Rabbi Pinchas had a feeling, he telepathically, he knew what happened here. And he said, Rabbi, no, I didn't go. I wasn't feeling well. And the Ba'al Shem Tov said to him, what is done, and it can't be changed. But he said to Rabbi Pinchas, not a word to anyone. At that point, it was right after Pesach, so many people had come to spend Pesach in Mezhebush. He sent almost all of them home after the holiday. Many times he would tell people to stay and he would teach, and he sent almost everyone home. No one knew why. It wasn't like in a negative way. It was just time to go. Many of his main students lived in Mezhebush, so they stayed. At a certain point, many of the students became aware that the Ba'al Shem Tov is fading. And one of them was Reb Leib Kessler. And he came to the Ba'al Shem Tov and he said, a life for a life. I'll give my life so you can live. And the Ba'al Shem Tov said, no. Said, heaven is given and heaven will take back. And there's nothing that could be done here. On Lag BaOmer, many of his students were there with him. It's a very joyous day, especially connected to the mystical inner dimensions of the Torah. And he gave over a Torah, and it was recorded later. And he told them that the word va'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And you shall love is va'ahavta. He said the gematria of va'ahavta is 414, which is 2 times light, 2 times or. Light or is 207. And he explained to them a very, very important concept in Kabbalah. There's what's called direct light and returning light. Direct light is, one second. Direct light is from God above to below. So that's what's called direct light, from above to below. Returning light, of course, is from us back to God, through our service of God, through doing mitzvah, Torah, prayer, all the service of God. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said that the word for light, which equals 207, is also the same as the word raz, which means secret. That's the secret teaching. In the Zohar, this word is used all the time. When they want to reveal something, it's called raza. So he said to them, he said, this straight light and returning light relates to God and human beings, but that also relates to the tzaddik and the rest of the people, that the tzaddik, the righteous one, he's like the direct light, and the students, the people, receive it and then hopefully are infused, and then they return it, not so much to the tzaddik, but to God. And so then he said, if you take the word for light, which is 207, in what's called mispar katan in reduced numerology, 2 and 7, 207 equals 9. The word va'ahavta is 2 times light. So he said 2 times 9 is 18. And then he said, in another 18 days, I will return my light. It will unify with God's light. And that light will shine until Mashiach comes. Most of the students didn't understand what he was alluding to. They thought this was just a very, very deep Torah he was giving out, which of course it was. But here he was actually in code saying, in another 18 days, I will be returning my soul to God. And that is exactly what happened. He died 18 days later on Shavuot, on the holiday of Shavuot. On the day of his death, it's the holiday. And he asked, at that point, he was bedridden. With great difficulty, he could even stand at that point. So he asked for his minion to come and daven in his room. And when they brought him his prayer book, he said, good, now I can talk to God a little bit more. They had their minyan, and then the townspeople didn't know how sick he was. And it was customary on a holiday is to go to the rabbi and get, greet him and get a blessing. And that's what they did. So many, many, many people came. He gave blessings. And then he revealed to his students, actually in the morning, even before the minyan, that I'm going to die today. And so obviously people didn't know exactly how to take this. He called in his closest students, and he started instructing them, especially what they should do after he passes away, and even how they should make a living. So he gave them spiritual teaching and practical. Then he called in his daughter Udal. We've discussed many times how close he was to his daughter, and that his daughter was, in a certain way, one of his top students. And all the students knew this. It was not hidden. Everyone knew that Udal was on a very, very high spiritual level, and they knew that the Ba'al Shem had taught her many things that many of the other students didn't receive. So he called her in, and he said that, and he reviewed with her the different instructions he gave to his core students. And he even told them, when I pass away, you can come to Udal, and she will give you proper advice how to do what I have instructed you to do. And he gave her the book of remedies. We had discussed this already. He was a healer, and he knew the secrets of botany, of plants. And he gave her the book of remedies. And it just says other Kabbalistic manuscripts. I don't think we know exactly what these Kabbalistic manuscripts were, but she was the one of everyone. She got them. And then he told her, if there's anything that you don't understand and you need help, come to my grave. And he taught her what's called a yichud. He taught her a special name of God. And he says, if you say this with the right kavana, I will come and advise you. Then he called in his son, Tzvi, and he basically told him, you will take over for me. But he said, but you have to know there's a bear in the woods, and there's Reb Pinchas. I mentioned him before, Pinchas of Koretz. In other words, if you need advice, who's the bear in the woods? That was Dov Bear, the Maggid of Mezrich. That was his name, Dov Bear. Dov means a bear in Hebrew, Dov Bear. And so here already it's alluded that he eventually would take over. After 1 year, as we discussed already, after being the Rebbe of the Hasidic movement for a year, the Ba'al Shem Tov came to him in a dream and told him, you need to pass on the mantle to the Maggid. He is the one who needs to lead the movement now. And we could see the great humbleness of Reb Tzvi as he revealed to everyone that his father had come to him, and he passed on the mantle of leadership to the Maggid. He also told him that you can come to my grave. And he didn't instruct him how he should lead the Hasidic movement. He said to him, your soul will tell you what to do. In other words, he understood his son was a very, very pure neshama. He just wasn't like leadership material. But the Ba'al Shem Tov felt that for right then, he could lead them. And then another one of his top students came in. He was Michal of Zlochov. And apparently Rav Michal had made up a nigun that the Ba'al Shem Tov loved very much. And he asked Rav Michal to sing it for him. And he said, in the future, anyone who sings this song and will do tshuva, I promise that from above, I will do my best to help him out. And so he heard this nigun. And then he said the following. There are a number of people, all of these people, and they're not that many, but they're in the room. And he said, the Midrash says, what sculpture can compare to God, who made a clay figure in his own image and breathed into it a part of himself so that it became a living creature? And he said, an artist puts his soul into his art. If you want to know an artist, look at his art. If you want to know God, look at human beings, for they are his artwork. So these are very, very beautiful teachings. After that, the Ba'al Shem had no more strength to talk. And the last thing that they heard him like whisper was, it's from the Psalms, let not the foot of pride come upon me. According to tradition, these are the exact words that the Arizal said as he died. Don't let the foot of pride come upon me. In other words, the Ba'al Shem Tov wanted to leave the world in complete humbleness, complete sincerity, faith, trust, with no ego involved. No, like, God, did you see what I did for you? He said, let the foot of pride not overcome me. And with those words, he passed away. Shortly afterwards, his son, who's now the Rebbe, gathered a lot of the core students, and they began exchanging what they remembered they had learned from the Ba'al Shem Tov. Remember, the Ba'al Shem Tov left nothing written, and it was the first book of teachings that were attributed to the Ba'al Shem Tov only came out 20 years later. We've mentioned him already, Yaakov Yosef of Polonia. He was one of the top students, and he recorded, but it took him 20 years to release this book. It was called Toldot Yaakov Yosef. And then other books of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov came out 40 years later, 60 years later. And so, but what his son was trying to do was to try, as the teachings were still fresh and they could be handed over to their students. So they are discussing his students, and the Ba'al Shem Tov came to Reb Tzvi and said to him, why is everyone concentrating on my Torahs? Why aren't they telling stories of my love and fear of God? So that tells us something very deep about the Ba'al Shem Tov. If you remember, when his father died, and the Ba'al Shem Tov was 5 years old, his father told him basically two things: to love every Jew, and not to have fear of anything but God. And so those are the two midot, characteristics of the Ba'al Shem Tov his whole life. His tremendous love of God, of Torah, of the Jewish people, in fact, all of creation. And he was fearless. He was fearless from the time that he was a young boy, when he used to go out to the forest by himself for hours at a time to commune with God. He had no fear, So here in this class, we've gone over his last few years, his last 7 weeks. And now what I want to do is I want to try to summarize in a relatively short time the main teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov and how they have affected the Jewish world and Jewish custom, Jewish learning, and really, in a certain way, the whole world. If you remember, we learned that Ba'al Shem Tov revealed himself in 1736. And if you remember, we learned this prediction from the Zohar, that in the 600th year of the 6th millennium, the well springs of water from below would flood the world, and the water from above would pour down and also flood the world, all in preparation for the coming of the Mashiach. And we learned that translates into 1840, and we've explained it's really 1740 to 1840. 1840 is already the 600th year. But that whole century, they were into the 600th year of the sixth millennium. And so the Ba'al Shem Tov, more than anyone, represented these waters that would flood the world. The teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov have not influenced just the Hasidic movement. His teachings, individual teachings and broader concepts, have filtered into all of Jewish thought. And I've mentioned this before, probably the most influential result of the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov is through Chabad. Because if you remember, when the Ba'al Shem Tov had a elevation of soul, and he merited to be in the presence of the soul of Mashiach, and he asked him, when are you coming? And the Mashiach said, when the well springs of your teachings spread to the farthest extremes. And that is exactly what the Lubavitcher Rebbe did, is he took the teachings of Chassidut and he sent out messengers literally to every corner of the world in order, in a very serious way, to fulfill these three words that the Mashiach told the Ba'al Shem Tov, Vayafutzu ma'inatecha chutza. And so we know that the influence of Chabad everywhere. And in fact, I think it was one of these Pew, P-E-W, studies. I think it was just last year, maybe the year before, and they took a wide consensus of unaffiliated Jews, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, New Age, Orthodox, Haredi, everything, and Chabad. And they asked, like, which one, like, do you subscribe to? Or which one has, I don't think subscribe, which one has influenced you the most? It was Chabad, of everything. Mostly because in the non-religious world, most people have no connection to anything Jewish other than Chabad. Chabad is their entrance. It's the door. After that, they might go other places. So this, when we're talking about the influence of the Ba'al Shem Tov, that's an example. Of course, it's through Breslov also. Remember, Rebbe Nachman is the great-grandson of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And the Breslov movement also has spread tremendously. Breslov books are everywhere. Of course, Chabad books are everywhere. Rav Ginsburg's books are everywhere. Rav Ginsburg's teachings are everywhere. So if we want to talk about the influence that the Ba'al Shem Tov has had, it's like everywhere. Simply everywhere. Now, the other thing that the Ba'al Shem Tov did that was, we'll call it even radical, is, we've discussed this many times, the basis, when we talk about Chassidut, the teachings of the Hasidic movement, they are all based on Kabbalah. But it's like Kabbalah for dummies, Kabbalah for the masses. And that's what the Ba'al Shem Tov did. When we were learning Keter Shem Tov, these were the teachings to his core group. And if you remember, these were highly Kabbalistic. These were not the teachings that he was attracting the simple Jews. But the principles of his teachings to his core group and to the stories he was telling and the influence he had on the masses was all based in Kabbalah. But what he did is he was able to create a new language that would be able to express Kabbalistic notions in a way that could be integrated, could be understood intellectually, emotionally. Remember, the Arizal, he really only had 20 students. He made no attempt to spread Kabbalah. And he really didn't try to explain in a way. In other words, all 20 students were well-known students of Kabbalah. So he was teaching on a very, very high level. He wasn't like trying to explain it to a mass of students. But the Ba'al Shem Tov understood the teachings of the Arizal, and he was able to translate them into a philosophy that could be, was highly relevant and could be shared and explained and integrated. So this is a tremendous change that he brought to Jewish thought. Of course, one of his main teachings was joy. And we might take it for granted that, of course, you have to serve God with joy. Like, why would you think differently? But when the Ba'al Shem Tov came on the scene, as we discussed many times, the Jewish people were so downtrodden, depressed, oppressed, uninspired, fearful, for good reason. Joy was not like an easy thing to achieve in those kind of conditions. And the Ba'al Shem Tov just burst on the scene and said, no, we serve God with joy. We don't minimize all these problems. And we've discussed this many times, how much energy the Ba'al Shem Tov put into trying to improve people's practical, physical, material lot in life. He didn't, he wasn't like just all up here. But he taught joy, and it infused the Jewish world. It woke everyone up to this day. To this day. The other thing the Ba'al Shem Tov did, which was revolutionary in his time, is he taught prayer as an immediate spiritual experience. Not just an obligation, an important obligation, but he turned prayer into a spiritual experience. This was a radical departure of the time. And of course, it has spread to now. And there is no doubt that Reb Shlomo's emphasis on joy and prayer is coming directly from the Ba'al Shem Tov. Directly. And we know how Carlebach davening has spread all over the world. All over the world. Another great contribution of the Ba'al Shem Tov was the idea of community. Now, community is obviously always important, especially Jews living in ghettos. Even when they were in mixed towns, there was the Jewish quarter, even before they were forced into ghettos. But, the importance of community was always there. But the Ba'al Shem Tov taught it more on a spiritual level. And that's why to this day, Hasidic communities, there's a tremendous emphasis on community and the community around the Rebbe. And that also had a tremendous influence on the Jewish world. The idea of spiritual communities. And we could trace this back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai there was a group that surrounded him. They were called the Chevraya, the friends. And even though it was clear that he was the Rebbe, but all of the students were tremendously accomplished Torah scholars. But he created an atmosphere called the Chevraya. And I know Rav Ginsburg tries very, very much to also create among his followers a feeling of community and camaraderie. And Reb Shlomo, his community, he called them the Chevra. After Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Chevraya, the Chevra, the friends. The Ba'al Shem Tov taught 3 loves, and he dedicated his whole life to it: love of God, love of Torah, and love of Israel. And he did his best to mend the kind of like almost the caste system that was operating then of the rabbinic elite and the other 95% of the working poor people. And the Ba'al Shem Tov wanted so much, and he spent so much of his energy teaching his core group the importance of the love of every Jew and ultimately of every human being. This has had a tremendous effect on Chabad. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, this was one of his main teachings. This idea of no matter where a fellow Jew is holding, no one's too far gone. Accept everyone where they're holding. And so therefore, usually when you go to a Chabad house around the world, you see everything. You see every possibility of Jew, and no one is judged. It's just they don't make any. They don't hide that we want to share the joy and the richness of Judaism. But everyone is invited in, and no one is rejected because how they look or anything, or their beliefs or anything. The other teaching that had a tremendous effect on Jewish thought, and we've gone over this a number of times, is based on the words in Proverbs, B'chal derachecha de'ehu, in all of your ways know him. The Ba'al Shem Tov taught getting close to God is not just in learning Torah and prayer. Of course, those are premium important. But the Ba'al Shem Tov was everything that a person does is an opportunity to get close to God. In all of your ways, know him. This, again, was a radical departure from Jewish thought till then. This idea when you're washing the dishes, when you're taking care of your baby, when you're working in the garden, when you're doing errands, whatever it is, none of that should separate you from God. So like I said, this had a tremendous effect on Jewish thought to this day. The other idea that is very, very important is the Ba'al Shem Tov's belief that the time of Mashiach is coming closer. So from its very inception, the Hasidic movement is infused with the belief, the desire, the hope, the prayer of bringing the Mashiach. We see the Ba'al Shem Tov tried to come to Israel. He and his daughter and Reb Tzvi, his scribe, almost lost their lives in the attempt. But he really thought if he could get together with the Orach Chaim, they could bring Mashiach. But the idea is that the hope and the belief of Mashiach has to be an immediate desire, not something that we just mouth the words. And of course, we see that with the Lubavitcher Rebbe as well, as he was trying to get people to like feel the immediacy of bringing Mashiach. There's no doubt this last year and 6 months have made that immediacy more relevant. The feeling that how much we need redemption now. And I'll add one last thing here, and that is the way that we learn Torah has to be in a way, again, this might seem obvious to everyone, but this was a tremendous innovation of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And you could see it in the Keter Shem Tov and his Torahs that it was giving over, that everything in the Torah has to be learned as it's relevant to us now. Now this again might seem obvious, but it's not obvious. In other words, the way the Ba'al Shem Tov is interpreting the Torah, literally everything in the Torah is a message for us personally, how to grow spiritually, how to conduct ourselves in this world, how to improve ourselves. And so therefore, so many of his Torahs take verses and stories in the Torah, in the Tanakh, and translate them from something that happened to an individual a long time ago to understanding that this is our story. Whoever this individual is, that's a part of them is in us. And the teachings and the lessons that we learn from these stories, and of course the mitzvot, are meant for us. The Ba'al Shem Tov taught of the 613 mitzvot today, because we don't have a temple, we don't have Kohanim and Levim who are doing the service, we don't have a Sanhedrin, the majority of Jews are not in Israel. We're only keeping technically about a third of the mitzvot. A full 2/3 of the mitzvot in the Torah are tied to the temple, the service, the Kohanim, the Levim, the land of Israel, the Sanhedrin. And so the question, what do you do with the other 2/3 of the Torah? We're just starting a new book, Vayikra. So much of the book of Vayikra, in a certain way, seems irrelevant to us. It's talking about a service in the Mishkan that we don't have anymore. But the Ba'al Shem was able to translate and reformulate all of these mitzvot into living lessons for us today. And this way of learning the Torah has had a tremendous effect on all Jewish learning. So with these last words, we are taking leave of the Ba'al Shem Tov for now. But in this final summary, we can see that we can never take leave of the Ba'al Shem Tov, because his thought, his teachings, his example it has infused all of Jewish life. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. And so my blessing is that we don't stop here, that we take this as a beginning, and each one of us tries to delve into the individual teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. There are so many books out in English now about the life and the teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Everyone can find it. You can find it online. And even more, the way that we live our lives, let it continue to be with the influence of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And final reminder, our last class until June, what did I say? June 10th, 1 second. June 10th, Tuesday, June 10th. But like I said, I will be in touch with everyone by different June 10th, by different ways, like I said, through the pre-recorded Haftorahs that we did, pre-recorded numerical gems, weekly mass email, and I will be contacting everyone through the WhatsApp groups with all kinds of messages and short Torahs.